Hey there, viewers. Imagine standing in a silent courtroom, all eyes on you. You've waited years for this moment, and now you're staring straight at the person who destroyed your child's life. What would you say? Because today, the father of one of Diddy's victims finally spoke, and what came out left the entire courtroom in pieces. Let's get into it. Chapter 1. The Man in the Lobby. I have been mopping this courthouse since before half these attorneys grew their first gray hairs. 23 years now. Floors don't lie, not like people do. You learn real quick how to read a person by how their shoes sit on the tile, how long they hover by the vending machines, how they flinch at every squeak of the door behind them. People leak stories they don't mean to tell. All you gotta do is be still long enough to listen. This morning, the air felt different. Not loud different, heavy different. I walked in around 6 with my thermos full of burnt coffee and a headache from my neighbor's damn music. The lobby lights were flickering again. Building maintenance never fixed anything right. But it wasn't the lights that got me. It was the man. He was already sitting there, back straight, hands folded real neat in his lap like he was in church, not a courthouse lobby that smelled like bleach and nerves. He had on this brown suit, not cheap, but not fresh either, like it had seen too many funerals. Shoes polished so hard they looked wet under the flicker of the exit sign. He didn't look up when I passed him, just sat there breathing slow, like he was counting every inhale, holding it like it hurt to let go. Didn't recognize him. Not a regular, not a lawyer, not one of the nervous civilians who come to beg for mercy or plead for justice. No folder, no phone, just a thin envelope clutched in his hand, fingers twitching now and then like the paper was whispering something to him. I started mopping the far end first, near the elevators, where the floor always collects grime from the outside. People forget how much dirt rides in on desperation. While I scrubbed, I kept watching him in the reflection on the metal panels. Still didn't move. I began to wonder if he was even real. But then, right around 7, the assistants started rolling in, heels clicking, phones buzzing, coffee sloshing over cheap cardboard trays. That's when the whispers started. Was he cleared? One woman asked, not even pretending to whisper. He wasn't on Judge Harlow's list, another said. They both glanced at the man, now shifting slightly in his seat, like he felt the eyes on him but didn't care enough to look back. He's not press, right? No badge, no recorder. They passed me without even a nod. People don't see janitors unless there's a spill. I moved closer to the reception desk, pushing my mop bucket slow, letting it squeak a little. Enough to cover up how close I was listening. Then came the bailiffs, 2 of them talking low as they leaned against the wall near the security scanners. I recognized one, big guy named Lyles, used to be a cop, quit after his partner got fired in that overtime scandal a few years back. I heard his name came from that assistant, the one who flipped, Lyles muttered, glancing toward the man. Why now? The other asked. Why not when the charges first dropped? Don't know. But they're saying he's the father of one of the trafficked ones, from the 2009 parties? I stopped mid-swipe, my stomach dropped. The one that never spoke, Lyles added. She was, 16? The other man shook his head slowly, looking straight at his boots. Now, like this felt different. Like the walls themselves had gone cold, leaning into. I mopped my way back toward the vending machines, just to see if the man would move. Still didn't. But his grip on the envelope was tighter now. Knuckles white, thumb rubbing the top flap like he was trying to wear a hole through it. Around 8, a woman from the DA's office came out. She was young, but her eyes had seen things that age you fast. She walked right up to him, didn't sit, just leaned down and whispered something. His face didn't change, not one muscle. He just nodded once, slow, like a man who already made peace with what was coming. I caught a glimpse of her clipboard. His name was written in the margin, Mr. G. No first name, no last, just an initial, like the rest of him was classified. At that point, the courthouse was fully awake, people rushing in and out of the courtroom upstairs. Courtroom 7A, where the Diddy case was unfolding like a horror novel written in reverse. I'd never seen so many suits in one place outside a funeral. You could smell the panic. Perfume couldn't cover it. More staff started peeking into the lobby, pretending they had business by the desk just to sneak a look at him. Everyone had a theory. "He's a decoy," someone said. "No, a character witness," another guessed. I kept my mouth shut, but I knew better. That kind of stillness ain't fake. That kind of grief doesn't play dress-up. 10 minutes before 9, 2 men in plain clothes came down the stairs. Not regular security, too clean, too quiet. They walked straight to Mr. G. He stood without needing help, moved like his bones were glass, but his purpose was steel. They said nothing, just nodded, and he followed. I dropped my mop. Didn't mean to, just slipped right out my hand and hit the floor with a wet smack. Mr. G didn't flinch. He walked past me like I was part of the furniture. But in that second, as he passed, his eyes flicked toward mine. Just a blink, a heartbeat, but I saw it. Pain so deep it had nowhere left to hide. A man who'd crawled through every shade of hell and come back carrying proof. The doors to 7A swung open. He disappeared inside. And for the first time in all my years here, I swear to God that courtroom went silent. No coughing, no papers shuffling, just a cold, unnatural quiet. A bailiff passed me a few minutes later, whispering to no one in particular. "They're calling him to the stand, the father, the one from the sealed file." I didn't move, just stared at the mop I'd dropped, the water spreading out around it like a puddle of something heavier. Mr. G wasn't just another witness. He was the crack in the dam, and the water was rising. Chapter 2. What she never said. They called her Ava in the court documents, though the full name was sealed, just Ava G. A letter to stand in for a life that barely got lived. The way they talk about her on the record is like she's a case file. A sequence of symptoms, a set of trauma markers and timelines, no smell of the shampoo she used to love, no mention of the little laugh that used to bubble out of her when her father tried to braid her hair and made a mess of it. None of that. Just nonverbal since 2011, diagnosed dissociative amnesia and prolonged institutionalization due to cognitive regression. Cold words that dress up the truth. She went somewhere nobody could follow, and she never came back. There's a binder, I found out later, thick as a Bible and twice as heartbreaking. Inside, page after page of observation reports, hospital logs, photos, and sealed police evidence. In the photos, Ava looks like any teenager. Big eyes, tired but trying. There's one where she's smiling faintly, holding a cat. The date stamp on the photo is 6 weeks before she vanished. It started the way these stories always seem to, an offer. A once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Her father said she was always chasing the music, always scribbling lyrics in notebooks, dancing in the living room to songs she shouldn't have known. When the woman approached her outside a dance studio and said she worked for a producer looking for fresh talent, Ava believed her. Who wouldn't? She even had a badge, a business card with a logo, numbers that rang when you called. Everything looked real, because it was meant to. They flew her to Miami first, not LA, not New York. Miami, where nobody asks questions if the music's loud enough. Her father didn't know at the time. She told him she was staying at a friend's house for the weekend. Said she needed a break, a breather. When he found out later that she'd flown across the country, she was already gone. The reports say she was checked into a hotel under a fake name. Everything was prepaid. Security footage shows her entering the building around 9:46 p.m., accompanied by a woman with sunglasses on, indoors, at night. A few bags, no conversation. 3 days later, she was found wandering barefoot outside a gas station 7 miles away. No ID, no phone, clothes torn at the hem. When the cashier asked her name, she just stared, didn't blink for 40 seconds. Paramedics said she had benzodiazepines and ketamine in her system, enough to sedate a grown man. That was 2010. For months, she didn't speak. When she did, it was fragments, colors, sounds, red lights. She'd mumble. "The mirror," she once whispered. He watched from behind it, then nothing. The words would slip out and vanish again, like breath on a mirror. Her father, Mr. G, tried everything. Neurologists, therapists, priests. He mortgaged the house to pay for a private clinic that specialized in trauma recovery. After a year, they told him what he already knew, but never wanted to hear. "She's here," one of the doctors said, "but she's buried too deep to reach." What haunted him most wasn't her silence, it was the flinching. The way she would jump when men walked into the room, the way she avoided her own reflection, the way she would wake up soaked in sweat, clutching her pillow so hard her fingers turned blue. He learned to speak in a whisper, to move slow, to become background noise, just so she wouldn't feel trapped. And even then she looked at him like she didn't recognize him, like she didn't recognize herself. It wasn't until years later that he learned the full scope. A detective working on a different case pulled up a flight manifest. Private charter, listed under a shell company tied to one of Diddy's known business fronts. Ava's name was there, along with 5 others, all young, all female, all gone from their homes for music opportunities. The plane had flown from Miami to Nassau, then to New York, where it docked under a separate alias, the same route linked to other open investigations, all of them involving accusations of trafficking under the pretense of talent scouting. Metadata from a recovered digital camera, seized during a separate raid on a luxury residence connected to Diddy's security consultant, placed Ava in the background of 3 different photos. Blurry but identifiable. Her posture was wrong, slouched, glassy-eyed, held up by someone just out of frame. She was wearing a dress her father didn't recognize, makeup she never used to wear. Mr. G wasn't told directly. He found out through a lawyer friend who slipped him a photocopy of one of the sealed pages. That's when he realized his daughter wasn't just a ghost of trauma. She was a witness they had erased. And she'd been erased so cleanly no one ever thought she'd speak again. For a long time he kept quiet. Part of it was shame, the kind that grows in the silence. Part of it was fear. He'd received a letter once, no return address, just a typed warning, let it rest, for her sake. He burned it in the sink, but never forgot the weight of the paper, how thick and expensive it was. Silence was being bought, and he'd accepted the price. But then, others started talking, women stepping forward, filing civil suits, telling stories that matched Ava's down to the smell of the hotel soap. One of Diddy's former assistants turned over an old BlackBerry, wiped but partially restored. In the logs, names, dates, coded entries like RL, Red Room, Compliant, and AL, New, Needs Training. Mr. G saw the initials and felt something snap. He went to the DA's office the next day. No appointment, just walked in with his daughter's old diary and a folder of medical bills. Said he wanted to talk. At first they said it was too late, too complicated, but then someone in the back room looked at the file again and said her name was on the new list. The assistant had mentioned her, had said there was a girl who never screamed, just stared. They added Mr. G to the witness roster quietly. No public notice, no headlines. The judge allowed it under a discretionary clause. victim's family testimony if the victim is deemed permanently incapacitated and unable to speak for themselves. The courtroom sealed the motion until the last possible moment. Diddy's team tried to block it, but by then it was too late. The evidence had tied the strings. The photos, the flights, the phone logs. Ava was the thread that connected everything. When Mr. G took the stand, the room felt smaller, like the walls had leaned in. He carried no notes, just the envelope he'd clutched in the lobby. Inside it, a single page from Ava's diary, written before she vanished. He didn't read it yet, just held it up. She was 15, he said. 15. She thought she was going to make music. She thought she was being seen, but what they did was take her voice, then her mind, and then everything else. His voice didn't shake, not once, not even when he said her name. I wasn't supposed to talk, he said. I was paid not to. But what they did to my daughter has to be spoken. And for a long moment, nobody moved. Not the jury, not the judge, not even the man he was looking at. Chapter 3, Silence was bought. Back in 2012, I still had grease under my fingernails. My back ached more than it should have for a man my age, and the world made a little more sense when I had an engine block in front of me. I was a mechanic, nothing fancy, nothing certified, but I could keep a car alive longer than most doctors could keep people breathing. Ava had just been home for 3 weeks. What was left of her, anyway. She didn't talk much, didn't eat unless someone reminded her, and didn't sleep without thrashing like she was trapped in something I couldn't see. Her room smelled like antiseptic and lavender oil. I used to sit outside the door and just listen for sounds. Silence was the worst. Silence meant she was back wherever they'd sent her, stuck in a loop only she could see. I was trying to hold everything together, running the shop by day, trying to teach myself how to handle her medications at night. The house was quiet. My wife had left the year before. Couldn't take it. Couldn't take Ava's ghost-like stare or my mood swings. Couldn't take watching the girl she helped raise disappear into a shell. She packed up one morning after a long cry in the kitchen and said she'd pray for us. And she meant it. But prayers didn't pay for treatment. The hospital bills started arriving like clockwork. Ambulance fees, ER scans, one bill for a CT scan that cost more than our damn truck. Then came the therapy invoices, which made me sit down and wonder how any family survived trauma without losing their home. Ava wasn't responding to half the medications they prescribed. There were weeks where she forgot how to hold a spoon. The private care center they recommended charged by the week. I needed 30 grand just to get her admitted. Insurance didn't touch a penny of it. Too specialized, they said. I was behind on rent. The shop was hanging on by a thread. Then came the car. It was a Thursday, late. I had just finished changing out the brakes on a neighbor's minivan when I saw the headlights wash across my driveway. Sleek thing, black, one of those imports you don't see around here unless it's on TV. The engine barely made a sound. The driver didn't get out, just sat there with the motor idling. Then the back window rolled down and a man's voice called my name. He didn't introduce himself, just asked if I had a minute. I did, but I didn't say so out loud. He stepped out, pressed slacks, no tie, expression flat as stone, carried a black folder under one arm. He walked up like he'd been on that porch before, like he'd practiced it. I represent some very powerful people who feel responsible, he said. Not guilty, not ashamed, responsible, like they'd knocked over a lamp. He told me they wanted to help Ava. They'd heard about what happened, heard she was struggling, heard I was struggling. There was money, he said, enough to take care of her, enough to give me breathing room, a clean start. No strings, he said, tapping the folder. Just the need for closure, on all sides. I didn't ask how he knew. Didn't ask how they found me. I should have. But when you've been drowning for months and someone hands you a life jacket, you don't stop to check if it's made of stone. I invited him in. We sat in the kitchen, where the light flickered and the table still had a crack from where Ava threw a glass in one of her episodes. He laid the folder flat. Inside, documents typed so clean they didn't look real. Legal jargon, clauses, penalties, one section underlined 3 times. Non-disclosure applies to all verbal, written, or implied statements related to the events involving the minor, herein referred to as AA, including but not limited to hospital visits, behavioral changes, third-party involvement, transportation, and suspected criminal activity. The number on the check? $200,000. I stared at it for a long time. Did the math in my head. That would cover her treatment for at least 2 years, get me back on track, keep the lights on. Hell, I might even be able to get her into the experimental program in Denver they told me about, the one that had a waiting list so long they didn't bother calling people back. But it wasn't just the money, it was the way the man said clean break, like this was a cut, and they were offering me a way to stop the bleeding. I asked him who sent him. He didn't answer, just looked me in the eye and said, "This is the best offer you'll get, and the last." That night, I didn't sleep, just kept going over it again and again, thinking about Ava's blank stare, thinking about her whispering red lights in her sleep, thinking about how I hadn't laughed in 6 months. The silence in the house was so thick it felt like I was underwater. Around 4 in the morning, I signed it. He came back the next day to pick up the papers, left a manila envelope on the table, no logo, no return address. Inside, a cashier's check, a burner phone, and a typed message with a single line, "Use this if there's ever a problem." Once. The phone rang that night. One ring, I answered. A voice said, "It's done." Then silence. After that, things were quiet, suspiciously so. The hospital bills got paid, my shop loan got refinanced out of nowhere, even got a visit from an inspector who told me my permit violations had been overlooked. I didn't ask questions, I just worked, kept my head down, took care of Ava the best I could. But every time I walked past that file cabinet with the NDA tucked inside, I felt sick, like I'd sold a part of her I could never buy back. The guilt didn't come all at once. It leaked in, slow and steady, like a ceiling drip you try to ignore until the plaster caves in. Some nights I'd wake up and wonder if she knew, if some part of her, buried deep in the silence, could feel the betrayal humming under her skin. I'd sit at her bedside and whisper apologies she couldn't hear, fold laundry next to her wheelchair and pretend everything was normal, but it never was. Then the news broke years later. One woman stepped forward, then another. Civil suits, leaked documents, a former assistant talking in riddles to avoid being sued. They called it a culture of compliance, a network of silence. But I knew what it really was. It was rot. And it had names, faces, location. And then someone sent me an email. No signature, just a scanned document. A log of preferred transports from 2010. Ava's name was on it. So were the initials of the woman who approached her outside that dance studio. The past came rushing back like a freight train, and all I could think about was that envelope, that phone, that NDA. I pulled it out for the first time in years, stared at the signature line. Mine. Just me. They never signed it. Not them. Just me signing away my voice. That night, I burned it, right there on the stovetop, watched the edges curl and turn to ash. It didn't make me feel better, but it felt like something. When I walked into the DA's office the next morning, I carried a copy of Ava's medical records, a photo of her smiling at the age of 12, and a sealed Ziploc bag with the charred corner of the NDA. I told them everything. In court, when the prosecutor asked if I'd ever signed anything that prevented me from speaking before, I nodded. When he asked if I still had it, I held up the sealed bag and placed it on the witness stand. The judge squinted at it, leaned forward. "Are you aware this may render any prior agreements null?" he asked. I smiled for the first time in weeks. "Good," I said, "because this is the last secret I'll ever keep for that man." And just like that, the courtroom went still again. Not from shock, but from the sound of silence finally breaking. Chapter 4. The room she was in. She told me once, before her voice gave out for good, that there was a red light. Just that. There was a red light, and I couldn't get out. At the time, I didn't know what it meant. I thought maybe she was dreaming. The hospital had her on so many medications back then, half her sentences trailed off before she finished them. But I remember the way she said it, like it wasn't a dream, like it had weight to it, the kind of memory that sits just beneath the skin and burns when touched. That phrase came back to me the moment I stepped into the courtroom. The carpet underfoot was too clean, the air cold enough to make my knuckles ache. There were people everywhere, but it still felt quiet somehow, like even the walls were holding their breath. I sat down in the witness chair and placed the photograph face down on the table. Ava, age 14, at a birthday party, holding a wrapped gift and smiling so wide it made my chest hurt to look at her. The prosecutor began slowly, asking me to recount what Ava had told me before her condition declined, before she stopped talking altogether. I cleared my throat. It was dry, not from nerves, but from the weight of everything that had gone unspoken. I said her words back to the room. There was a red light, and I couldn't get out. For a moment, no one moved. I went on. She wasn't herself when she came back. You have to understand that. Ava was sharp, funny. She'd light up a room without trying, but after that trip, she wasn't just quiet. She was missing. Like someone had taken her soul and left the body behind. I told them about the woman, mid-30s, pretty, professional voice. Claimed she worked for someone big in the industry, wouldn't say who. Said she saw potential in Ava's dance videos and wanted to fly her out for a showcase. She approached Ava directly outside her dance class. Gave her a sleek black business card that said nothing more than Velocity Creative Talent Group with a number printed across the bottom. No address, no name, just sleek letters and a promise. Ava never told me about the first trip until after it had already happened. She said she was going to a friend's for a weekend, said she needed a break from school and wanted to decompress. That kind of thing wasn't like her, but teenagers drift, especially when they're chasing a dream. By the time I knew she'd left the state, she was already back, but different. She started sleeping with the lights on, jumping at the sound of the doorbell. Her phone was always off. Her hands shook sometimes, like she was cold even when wrapped in blankets. And then came the whispering. Not to me, just to herself. Words like mirror, watching, they said smile. One time, I found her curled up in the hallway, arms around her knees, whispering the word again, over and over until she stopped responding entirely. That's when I knew something had happened. I didn't know until later, but there were multiple trips, different cities, each one booked under fake names, arranged through email addresses that vanished 2 days after contact. Her flight confirmations came through encrypted PDFs. The metadata would get wiped the moment they were downloaded. Someone had gone to great lengths to make sure nothing stuck. But not everything was erased. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out Ava's old phone. I held it up for the courtroom to see. "This is hers," I said. "We found it in a storage box 3 years after her return. The SIM card was missing, but the device still had storage logs." The forensic tech from the DA's office took the stand after me and confirmed what I already knew. The phone had airdrop records, small pings of data from other nearby devices, time-stamped and geotagged. 3 files stood out, 2 photos and 1 contact card. All 3 came from different devices on the same night in a Miami hotel. The files were encrypted, but the devices they originated from had been tied to 2 other victims who had since come forward. One of the photos was a blurry shot of a red-lit room. Another showed a silver tray with a bottle of champagne, 3 glasses, and what looked like small baggies lined up like party favors. Ava never took those pictures. They were dropped into her phone, whether by accident or cruelty. I'll never know. I spoke about the hotel she stayed in, the one I'd later traced through a travel receipt she didn't know I found. A luxury suite booked under a name that belonged to a company I'd later discovered was a shell for Diddy's personal event management branch. The same branch used to organize private gatherings, as the paperwork politely described it. But what those gatherings really were, well, the photos said more than any NDA ever could. She mentioned mirrors, I said. Said there was one in the ceiling. I thought she was confused, but when I looked up the suite, I found online reviews that mentioned mirrored ceilings. One even joked about it, called it a voyeur's paradise, said you could see everything from above. And then I told them about the red light. She said at once that there was a red light and she couldn't get out. I didn't understand then. I thought maybe it was a metaphor, some dream logic. But after reading the reports from the other victims, after hearing that same detail come up again and again, I started to understand. The red light wasn't a dream, it was real. It was the light used in the room, maybe to film, maybe to disorient, maybe just to scare them. I don't know, but it was there. I could feel the tension in the room shift. People were leaning forward now, listening closer. Then the prosecutor asked me what I believed. Did I believe that the defendant, Sean Combs, had knowledge of this? Did I believe he participated? I looked him straight in the eye. That man, sitting at the defense table in a suit that cost more than my house. Calm, unreadable. But I saw the way his fingers drummed the wood. The way his jaw flexed once, just slightly. I don't just believe it, I said. I know it, because she said something else once, not in words, not directly, but in the way she looked at me when I asked her who was there. She went still, frozen, and then she mouthed something. I closed my eyes, remembering. She said, "The men from the videos." I asked which videos. She wouldn't say, but there was one time. She had a magazine on her lap, some celebrity thing. He was on the cover. She dropped it like it burned her. I leaned in closer to the mic. He wasn't just there, I said. He watched. He chose her. There was a long silence after that. You could hear the air conditioning hum, the shuffle of someone's shoe in the back row. And Diddy didn't move. Not an inch. The judge looked down at his notes. The prosecutor thanked me, and for a second, I thought that was the end of it. But I wasn't done. I pulled the photo off the table, the one I'd placed there when I came in. I flipped it face up and held it so the jury could see. "This is her," I said. "This is who she was, before they broke her, before they put her in that room with the red light. She was a child. And now, she'll never be anything else." I left it there on the stand and walked back to my seat. The floor beneath me felt like it might give out, but I didn't fall. Because for the first time in years, I was standing for something that mattered. Chapter 5, What the Bodyguards Saw. They didn't say his name. Not once. The prosecutor referred to him only as Witness 47, and when he walked into the courtroom flanked by 2 marshals, you could feel the room shift. He wore a loose gray blazer, jeans, and tinted glasses that didn't quite hide the tension in his jaw. You could tell he wasn't used to sitting still. The way his eyes kept scanning the exits, the tight clench in his fingers as he gripped the armrest. This was a man who'd lived in shadows, and now he was stepping into the light for the first time with the full weight of what he knew pressing against his ribs. The judge granted partial concealment. No cameras, limited sketching, and a wide berth from the gallery. This wasn't just for safety, it was respect. The kind of witness you don't parade. The kind you protect because, even if they were part of it, even if they helped it all run like a well-oiled machine, they finally cracked. And cracking in a world built on fear isn't weakness. It's a small kind of rebellion. He sat down at the stand and adjusted the mic like it might bite him. His voice came low at first, raspy like he hadn't spoken much lately. I worked personal detail for the accused from 2006 to 2013, he said, eyes not quite meeting the jury. Security, surveillance, discreet logistics. The prosecutor asked him to elaborate. He exhaled, looked at his hands. That meant I wasn't just guarding doors, I was managing bodies, schedules, party flows. You'd have rotating rooms in these rented houses or hotels, coded by light colors or numbers. Green meant entrance, red meant locked down, blue meant entertainment ready. We kept the girls moving like cattle. He didn't look proud of it. He looked like a man vomiting memory. When asked about freak nights, his jaw tensed again. Monthly, sometimes more. Usually the last weekend of the month. Private invite. Phones locked in safe pouches. Some were flown in. Some were scouted local. Always girls. Always young. The prosecutor asked how young. He paused, then said, some lied about their age. Some didn't have to. There were murmurs in the courtroom then, people shifting in their seats, looking at each other with that quiet panic that spreads when you realize the stories might be worse than anyone had said out loud. The judge called for silence. Then came the part no one expected. He looked straight ahead, voice steadier now. In 2009, I was working perimeter on an event at a private compound just outside Atlanta. These were deeper gatherings, higher clearances, fewer staff. We were told it was a celebrity birthday, just a celebration, but the rules were different that night. Rooms locked from the outside, code phrases on the radio like rotation initiated or display ready. One girl in particular caught my attention. She was smaller, quiet, didn't say much. The prosecutor leaned in. Did you learn her name? He nodded. Not from her. From a clipboard one of the handlers dropped. Her name was Ava. Ava G. My stomach turned when I heard it. Sitting in the gallery, I felt my heart thud against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The room blurred for a second, my ears filled with static. But I didn't look away. She wasn't meant to be seen. He continued, not by us. But something went wrong. I was stationed near the east hallway unmarked exit. Around 2 a.m., 2 men came through the hall carrying her between them. She wasn't moving. Barefoot. No purse, no ID. They were arguing. Something about the dosage. One of them said, he's gonna flip if she ODs. The other said, just get her out of the red room. The prosecutor asked him what he did. He shook his head. Nothing. I didn't stop them. I radioed in for instructions, and I was told to redirect concern to level 2. That was code for shut up and stick to your post. So I did. His voice cracked slightly when he said it, but he didn't cry, just pushed the words out like they'd been waiting years to surface. The prosecutor then asked if the defendant Diddy was aware of the incident. He nodded. Absolutely. The next morning we had a protocol meeting. He was there. Not in person, video call. He gave direct instructions, told the cleanup team to sanitize the area, no gaps. That meant bleach, tape removal, camera wipe. Even had us rewire a smoke detector because it had internal storage. He said, make it look like nothing ever happened. The room was dead silent. The prosecutor then asked about the preferred girls terminology. He sighed. It was a tier system. Girls were categorized based on vibe, energy, and discretion. Some were marked compliant, others were flagged as high risk and sent home early, but some stayed, got nicknames. Ava's was Quiet Muse. She didn't fight, didn't cry. That made her ideal. I wanted to stand up and scream then. Wanted to leap across the aisle and shake something, anything. But I didn't move. Couldn't. I had to hear it. Every word. The prosecutor paused, then asked if he ever questioned what he was doing. He laughed, bitter and tired. All the time, but the money kept coming. And the fear? It's real. You don't just walk away. People disappear, careers vanish. There's a whole system behind this, man. A machine built to erase anyone who doesn't play the part. Finally, they opened the floor to the defense. One of Diddy's lawyers, tall and cold-eyed, stood and stepped forward like he was about to gut a fish. His voice was sharp as a scalpel. Mr. Witness, are you aware that Ava G. was 17 years old during this alleged incident? The god didn't flinch. He looked up, right at the man, and then he said something I'll never forget. We all were. A pause. That's why I'm here. It landed like a hammer blow. The courtroom didn't gasp. It didn't erupt. It just folded in on itself. People sat back in their seats like something had been taken from them, like a piece of the illusion had snapped in two. The defense tried to pivot, asked about his pay, his motives, whether he was seeking immunity in other cases. He answered calmly, said he'd already signed away any protections, said he was done living with blood on his hands. When he stepped down from the stand, he didn't look at Diddy, not once. But Diddy looked at him. For the first time since this trial began, I saw something slip in that man's face. A flicker, like maybe he knew the cracks weren't sealing up this time. Maybe he realized the people who used to keep his secrets were starting to speak louder than his lawyers. The judge called for a recess. People filed out in near silence. I stayed in my seat, still hearing the guard's voice in my head. We all were. That's why I'm here. Chapter 6. The Bruise That Didn't Heal. There was a manila folder on the desk in front of me. Nothing flashy, no stickers, no labels, just old paper. But it weighed more than any folder should. Not physically, something else. A heaviness that sank into my fingertips when I touched it. I'd kept that folder locked away for years, shoved in the back of a drawer that I stopped opening. I couldn't look at what was inside. Not then, not until I knew I'd be able to make someone else look too. The prosecutor held it now. Her voice was steady, but I could tell she didn't want to open it either. She'd seen it all already, every scan, every photo, every piece of evidence, but this was the first time it would be entered into the court record, and everyone in that room knew what that meant. No more euphemisms, no more phrases like alleged or suspected. We were about to show them what silence looks like when it has a body. She slid the first photograph out and turned it toward the jury. It was a full-body ER intake shot. Ava lying on a stretcher, arms limp at her sides, eyes closed. Her lips were cracked. There was a bruise under her left eye, already yellowing at the edges. Her shoulder was scraped raw, like she'd been dragged. But it was her neck that caught everyone's attention. 4 faint horizontal marks, like fingerprints that had tried to erase her voice. The prosecutor cleared her throat. This image is from June 11, 2010. Emergency intake at St. Germain Medical Center. The patient was admitted by paramedics after being found disoriented and nonverbal outside a gas station on Route 7. Initial toxicology showed high concentrations of benzodiazepines and ketamine. The patient was 17 years old. Her name was Ava G. The courtroom didn't make a sound. I sat there frozen, hearing my own breath, feeling my knees lock up beneath the table. The images kept coming, close-ups of her arms, small circular bruises like pressure points from restraint, her thighs, faint outlines of fingertips and something that looked like rope burn. Her wrists, deep red abrasions, partially healed but raw enough to speak for themselves. And then came the internal images. Scan results: pelvic trauma, abdominal bruising, vaginal tearing consistent with forced entry. A report from the attending physician noted chemical residue inconsistent with over-the-counter medication. In layman's terms, something foreign had been used, something not designed for humans. I thought I could handle it. I told myself I was ready, But as I stared at the photo of her hospital bracelet, her name misspelled, her birthday a day off, I felt something unravel inside me. I gripped the table so hard my fingers went numb. I don't remember falling, only that I heard the prosecutor's voice shout my name, and then 2 hands caught me before I hit the floor. They tried to escort me out. I shook them off. "No," I said, my voice barely audible. "I have to finish." The judge gave me a moment. I sat back down, chest heaving, blood pounding in my ears, and then she took the stand. The nurse. She walked slowly, her uniform replaced by a simple blazer and slacks, hair pinned back, her name tag read Esther D. She looked older now, but there was something calm in her posture, like a person who had carried guilt for a long time and finally found somewhere to lay it down. "I remember her," she said once she was sworn in. "We see a lot of patients, but I never forgot this one." The prosecutor asked why. Esther looked down. "Because she didn't speak." But she didn't stop crying, not loudly, just tears, constant, silent. Like she wasn't crying from pain, but from something deeper, something that couldn't come out any other way. She described how Ava flinched when touched, even by female staff. How she kept looking toward the door, as if expecting someone to come in and finish what had started. How she refused food and water, and how every time a man entered the room, her heart rate would spike so hard it set off the monitors. I asked her if she wanted to call someone, Esther said. She shook her head. I asked her if she wanted us to call the police. She closed her eyes. I asked if someone had hurt her. That's when the tears came faster. She paused, taking a shaky breath. "We filed a report. We followed protocol, but no one came. No family was listed, no ID, and after 72 hours she was transferred to the psych wing for observation. I don't know what happened after that. I always wondered. I could barely look at her. Not from blame, but because she was the first person in all these years who'd seen my daughter and actually tried to help. The defense tried to poke holes, asked why she didn't press further, asked why the injuries weren't escalated. Esther responded with a calm that cut sharper than any accusation. Because we were trained to follow orders, and orders said she was just another overdose, another party gone wrong, another statistic. But she wasn't. I knew it then, and I know it now. The prosecutor then asked me to speak again. I stood slowly, legs trembling, but I stayed upright. I reached into my coat and pulled out Ava's medical file. I opened it, and from the back, I withdrew one last photo. Not from the hospital, from home. Taken a month before she vanished, she was sitting on the porch, holding a lemonade, smiling wide with chipped nail polish and sunburn on her nose. I held it up for the jury. "This is the bruise that didn't heal," I said. "Not the ones on her skin, not the ones in those photos. This smile, this is what they stole. She never smiled like this again, not once." I put the photo down gently. And the people who took it, they didn't do it in a moment of passion. It wasn't a mistake. It was organized, it was methodical, it was covered up, and it's still happening. I looked over at Diddy then. He didn't meet my eyes, just stared ahead like he was watching a screen only he could see. The judge called for order, but even she looked shaken. As I sat back down, the prosecutor leaned toward the bench. She spoke in a voice not meant for us to hear, but I saw the judge's eyes widen slightly. He turned to the bailiff and whispered something. The bailiff stiffened, and then, in a voice quieter than any gavel ever struck, the judge said, "We need to close the gallery." The sound was soft, but it echoed louder than anything that day. Because some things are too real for public consumption. Some truths don't belong on the evening news. Some wounds are too deep to heal, but they can still be seen. And now, finally, they were. Chapter 7. The handwriting on the envelope. This is handwriting. The handwriting seems to be Russian. The handwriting has a look. Cough. There's something about handwriting that technology still can't fake. You can forge signatures, fake documents, manipulate photos until the truth feels elastic. But a man's hand, the way he forms his letters, how his pressure dips or peaks on the page, those are tells. They speak the parts a person doesn't want to say out loud. They betray tone, intent, even habit. The way a lowercase g curves or how a period is pressed just a little too hard. These things reveal more than typed paragraphs ever could. That's why when the envelope was first discovered, I didn't think much of it. Just an old piece of paper at the bottom of Ava's storage bin, tucked between spiral notebooks and hospital discharge summaries. But now I understand it was the final piece, the one that made it all undeniable. I had forgotten about that envelope. Honestly, I'd shoved a lot of that stuff into boxes and forced myself to forget it. Ava never wanted to revisit anything. Once she stopped speaking, I assumed the past had sealed itself off in her mind. The notebooks she kept before the breakdown were erratic, some filled with scribbled lyrics, others with drawings of doors and hands and mouths with no faces. But the envelope stood out because it was neat, clean, intentional. Unlike her frantic notes, this was deliberate, a message left with precision. It was white, yellowing at the edges, not sealed. Inside were 3 small slips of paper, each folded once. The paper wasn't ruled, but the spacing was perfect. No lines needed. The first read, "Obey." The second, "Smile, drink." The third, "Forget." Just those words. No context, no signature. But something about them chilled me more than the photos had. The prosecutor introduced the expert witness, a forensic linguist and handwriting analyst named Dr. Amina Hart. She looked like someone who didn't waste words, and when she walked to the stand carrying a thick binder, the courtroom knew something important was about to happen. She was methodical in her explanations, never dramatic, never reaching, just facts, patterns, data. She began by laying out her credentials, which were more extensive than most of the lawyers in the room. 30 years of field experience, former consultant for federal agencies, published works in forensic semiotics. She spoke with the kind of quiet confidence that doesn't need to raise its voice to make the truth feel heavy. She opened the binder and flipped to a scanned image of the envelope. A digital projection appeared on the courtroom screen, grainy, slightly off-white, with bold handwriting in all caps. To be opened after the room. No return address, no postmark, just the words centered on the envelope's face. Then she projected the 3 slips, each one written in the same hand, clean and sharp. Obey, smile, drink, forget. The letters were angular, sharp, not the kind of cursive that flows, but the kind that cuts. Next, she brought up a sample from a personal journal that had been obtained during discovery, one that had belonged to Diddy. It wasn't seized easily. His legal team had fought tooth and nail to suppress it, calling it irrelevant, private, protected under artistic expression. But they lost. And when the judge finally allowed excerpts, the linguist got her hands on scanned pages. She flipped to one. The screen changed again, a page from that journal, written in a similar sharp scrawl. They do better when told early. Obey, let go, let it in. And another, smile for the camera. That's what they came for. And another, still, drink first. Fear tastes better when it's slow. The courtroom froze. You could feel people blinking, like the air had changed, like the walls had gotten thinner. I looked around and saw even the jury, who had been trained to keep their faces neutral, letting their eyebrows furrow, their jaws clench. The linguist didn't rush. She explained that handwriting has over a dozen points of analysis. Line slope, pressure, loops, spacing, how letters connect or break. She laid them out, one by one, matched the patterns, cross-referenced the phrasing. Then she did something that sent shivers down my spine. She laid both samples on top of one another. Overlay transparency, the words from the envelope and the journal, though written years apart, lined up almost perfectly. "This handwriting is not just similar," she said. "In my expert opinion, it is consistent with over 97% confidence to be authored by the same individual." And that individual was seated 10 feet from me. When the prosecutor asked what that meant in context, Dr. Hart didn't hesitate. "It means the notes found in Ava's belongings match the same linguistic patterns and handwriting style as the journal obtained from Mr. Combs. It means the controlling language used in both instances comes from the same psychological source." She paused. "It means the commands, obey, smile, drink, forget, were likely written by the same man who instructed others on how to condition these girls." The silence in the courtroom was so sharp it could cut through steel. I didn't blink. I wanted every second of this burned into memory. The defense scrambled, of course, objected to the phrasing, to the psychological inferences, claimed the journal was a mix of song lyrics and creative writing, said the words were metaphor, that it was all coincidence. But the expert didn't flinch. Coincidence doesn't write with the same tremor in the G's. Coincidence doesn't form the same slash on the capital E every single time. Coincidence doesn't mimic speech rhythm in written form. This was not abstract art. This was control in ink. Then came the moment I knew I'd been building toward. The prosecutor asked if I had anything else I wanted to share. I pulled out a single piece of paper, folded once, creased from years of being hidden in a drawer. It was from Ava's old notebook, the one she wrote in after she came back. Most of it was indecipherable, words scratched out, drawings, scribbles. But one page had a single sentence, written slowly, deliberately, in her own hand. "I'm still in the room." That was all. I walked to the stand. I didn't need a mic. I read it out loud. "I'm still in the room." The jury leaned forward. One woman had her hand over her mouth. A man near the back swallowed like his throat had gone dry. "She wrote that in 2011, I said, over a year after the incident. She was home, safe, eating 3 meals a day, sleeping under her own roof. But she was still in the room." I looked toward Diddy. "You kept her there." He didn't move. And then it happened. For the first time in this trial, in all the long months of proceedings, he lost it, slammed his fist against the table. The sound echoed through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Chairs shifted, people jumped. One of his attorneys reached out to calm him, but he shoved the hand away. The judge stood. "Restrain the defendant." 2 marshals stepped in, hands firm on his shoulders. He didn't resist, but he didn't sit back down either. Just stood there, breathing hard, eyes burning into the wall ahead like it was something he could set on fire. The judge ordered a 5-minute recess, though it took 10 before anyone moved again. I sat down slowly, hands trembling. In that moment, I didn't feel triumph, only release. Because the words Ava had written, the ones she couldn't speak, had finally been heard. And for the first time since this began, I knew she wasn't in that room alone anymore. Chapter 8. The room goes silent. It wasn't until I stood up to leave that I realized how quiet the courtroom had become. Not the kind of silence that follows a verdict or a ruling or a gavel. No, this was something else, something older. It was the silence of something breaking, an illusion, a reputation, a shield that had lived too long and hurt too many. And now it was over. I hadn't won anything. This wasn't about justice, not really. This was about the truth and what it costs to tell it. The chair scraped softly behind me as I pushed it back. I didn't rush. I didn't look at the bailiff or the jury or the press section where sketch artists sat with their pencils paused mid-stroke. I looked at him, the man who stole her. The man who watched her through a mirror, who gave orders in code and turned pain into ritual. He was still seated, but he wasn't the same. His body leaned forward like gravity had finally remembered he was guilty. His hands were folded, not in prayer, but in something closer to a plea. His eyes, once hidden behind sunglasses or bored indifference, were raw now. Wet, angry, but not focused. He looked through me, past me, like he was scanning for an exit that didn't exist. I thought I'd want to spit. Thought I'd want to scream or curse or throw something at him. But when I finally spoke, all I could say was the truth. "I don't hate you," I said. His eyes twitched. "If I hated you, it would mean I still thought you were a man." He didn't flinch, but I saw it in his shoulders, the way they pulled in, as if bracing for something heavier than fists. "You're not," I continued. "You're something else. You're a sickness. A sickness. A mask that people wore so they could keep pretending the world made sense." I turned to the jury then. Their faces were tense, exhausted, but locked on me. "I don't want you to remember my daughter as a victim. I don't want her to be another tragic face in a folder. I want you to remember that even after everything, she still left behind her words. Her words that man tried to bury." I reached into my coat and held up the note one last time, folded, worn. Ava's handwriting faint, but still there. "I'm still in the room." I let the silence answer for me. And then I walked, past the prosecutor, who nodded solemnly without meeting my eyes, past the judge, whose gavel rested unused in her hand, past Diddy, who sat still and quiet as if the moment had turned his skin to stone. His lawyers were in disarray. One of them had already gathered their things and left. Another sat frozen, phone in hand but not scrolling, not blinking, just stuck. At the door I paused, not because I doubted, not because I feared, but because I heard something, barely a breath, but enough. Behind me, the courtroom had not resumed its rhythm. No one had spoken, no one had moved. Even the stenographer had paused, her fingers hovering above the keys like she was afraid to capture what came next. Then I stepped out, into the hallway where the light was different, softer, warmer. There were no reporters, no flashbulbs, no crowds. The judge had ordered the building cleared earlier, before the evidence was shown. Now it was just staff, a few deputies, and Marlowe. The janitor stood at the far end of the corridor, mop in hand, leaning against the wall like he'd been carved there. He didn't call out, didn't wave, just gave me a slow nod as I passed. And under his breath, barely above a whisper, he said, "That man didn't just testify, he buried him." I didn't turn back. I couldn't. There was nothing left to look at. Outside, the air hit me in the face like something clean. I hadn't noticed until then how long I'd been holding my breath. The courthouse steps stretched down in front of me like the end of a long, broken road. I took each one slow, each step a little lighter than the last. I didn't think about what would happen next. The appeals, the headlines, the spin. Let the lawyers argue. Let the press speculate. Let his people try to polish the ruins. That was their game. Mine was done. Ava would never get to tell her story in her own voice. They had taken that from her. But today, in that room, her silence had become something louder than anything I could have imagined. And I wasn't just her father anymore. I was her echo. I reached the bottom step and kept walking. Not fast, not slow, just steady. And I never looked back.